Welcome to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast,
brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants.
Exclusive weekly conversations about how emerging tech is changing accounting,
business, and finance.
Now, more than ever, we all must think differently about what we do and how we do it.
Being bolder, breaking conventions, going beyond the old comfort zones.
It's Women's History Month, so all March we'll hear exclusively from female guest experts who have done just that.
Women from around the world who are impressively ahead of the curve.
Leading innovation in everything from blockchain
to robotic process automation,
artificial intelligence to human intelligence,
data analytics to cybersecurity.
Subscribe to this podcast for free.
And together,
we'll go beyond disruption.
Welcome to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. My guest today is Lindsay Stevenson. She's a CPA CGMA, and I'm Jennifer Gardner, your host. And we're going to be talking about a really interesting topic today. We're going to be talking about fear. So Lindsay, what does fear have to do with professional development?
Yes, so it's an interesting question, right? Because as CPAs and accountants and people that are working in the finance industry, I think a lot of time, we're so focused on the numbers, the outcome, the results, that tends to be what we really think is important, that we never really think about what keeps us from getting to the next level, the next important thing, the next step in our evolution of professionalism and personal development. And a lot of that really is seated in fear. And so we don't think of it, right? We try to be analytical in everything that we do, right? So when we're making decisions, when we choose not to do something, we generally are explaining to ourselves that there's all these really important reasons why we shouldn't do it, right? Or why we did it a way, that may not have made sense to someone else. And what happens is that really underneath all that, underneath all those analytics and all those efforts that we make to describe every little reason for what happens or the choice that we make, there's this deep feeling inside that we're so unsure that we don't want to do it, right? And that's really fear. And I think in the CPA profession, the accounting profession, in probably even more so, because there's so much pressure on us to have the answer, to do the right thing, to be right, that we never want to do anything that's uncertain. And so fear really is uncertainty, right? You're afraid of the unknown. You really aren't sure if you can do it. We see this a lot in the profession, particularly with women, young women, as they develop. They wait until they're perfect at something before they take the next leap to get into the next level. And so it's that fear of not knowing what you're doing or not being able to do it all the way. And so that's sort of what it has to do with our professional development, is that really fear holds us back from the potential of what we really can do and accomplish, even as a profession-wide group of people. What we can do for our clients, what we can do for the economy, what we can do for the world is all sort of couched in this loss of potential because we're so afraid.
Are there particular things that accountants tend to be afraid of more than others? We mentioned, you mentioned the need to have the right answer, right? To be perfect, to have that right answer, to be analytical. So how does that play out? What kinds of things tend to be a little bit scarier for accountants to do as they progress in their careers, or what have you witnessed around that?
Sure. Well, I can speak, from personal experience. Definitely the fear of not being right is scary, especially in your early development, right? So when you're staff level, you're just out of college. You have book smarts, and so you understand accounting from a book sort of viewpoint. But as you develop, you recognize the need to be able to apply things that you learned from the book to real life situations that don't follow the book exactly. And then you're scared, you're afraid, right? Because it doesn't follow the book. So what you know doesn't necessarily equate to what you see. And then you start freaking out. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to apply this. And so I think early in our careers, that's a lot of it, that being right. I think as we move forward in our careers, as we grow as adults, honestly, having feelings about things and really like understanding ourselves, for me, became the biggest kind of space of fear. I was afraid to acknowledge that maybe what I was doing professionally wasn't really a passion for me. I happened to be good at it and it was okay, and I could get through my work, but there was this element missing of the passion, right? The drive to really accomplish something and make a difference. And I ignored it for a really long time because I was so scared that that wasn't what an accountant was supposed to be. And I think what's really cool in the profession that you'll see now, like a trend that we've kind of witnessed, is that CPAs, accountants, the profession are starting to say, what else can we do? How else can we do this? What's a new way to explore this? And how do you feel about it? And I feel like that conversation really hadn't been happening earlier in my career. And so I think that fear of doing something outside compliance. And I think, we talk about it Barry has done his Go Beyond Disruption session across the country and in multiple conferences. And what he talks about is saying we have to be different than what we've done for 100 years as CPAs and accountants. And we aren't necessarily sure we have the answer of what that different looks like, but the world is changing and we have to be okay with changing with it. And that's what's so cool is I think as a profession, we're starting to sort of address that fear and say, hey, go beyond really means we don't know what beyond is, but we're going to go there and we're going to do it together and we're going to figure it out as we go. And that, I think as a profession is so, so cool to be talking about that specific fear, because I think as CPAs, as accountants, we all have it, right? It's what's next. If we're not doing it the same way we've done it for 15 years, how are we going to learn how to do it fast enough to be relevant?
So how do you see fear playing a role in your decision-making process? And how do I know if I'm making a fear-based decision?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we're, as a society, we raise our children to actually make fear-based decisions unintentionally, right? We do that by small little things that we probably aren't really thinking about. But things like, if you touch this hot stove, it will burn you, right? So now the decision not to touch the stove is not because you have an alternate decision that's better and gives you a better result, but because you don't want a negative consequence, right? So that's sort of an example of from our childhood days, we are sort of taught to make decisions on what we don't want to happen, right? So if you make this choice, X will happen. So don't make that choice, right? Move forward. And I think when we're making fear-based decisions, what you'll see is that you're having conversations with yourself about what are the downsides of the decision if you don't make it. So it could be, let's say you wanted to transition to some other role in your organization and you sit there and you think about it. And then suddenly you have this list of, if I take this job, here's all the negative things that will likely happen or could happen. And so pretty soon you say, I just shouldn't take the job. I'm just going to stay where I know how things work. I know what the outcomes are going to be. I'm really comfortable here. And that's scary because it's unknown and some bad things could happen. So I'm not going to do it. And that's sort of how fear-based decisions play out, is you see sort of all those what if negative scenarios that talk you out of doing something, then you're making decisions based on fear. And I don't want to get into politics, but I will say, on a national level, we see this playing out constantly in all of the media that comes out, right? Is that there's just all of these discussions based on, if we don't do X, Y will happen and Y is really bad, right? So, and that's a fear-based decision, as opposed to the alternative, which is looking at what opportunities exist for you and how are those potential benefits something that fit in with what you really want. So if you're looking at that new job opportunity within your organization and you say, wow, if I did this, the potential for me to make an impact on the people that I care about grows exponentially. And oh my God, if I fail, it's going to be a train wreck. But what if I don't fail? What if I don't fail? What does that look like? And that's a different kind of decision-making process. So that's kind of the difference is in terms of how fear plays out in our decision-making process. And as parents, we do it, right? Oh my God, if my kid does this, then everything's going to fall apart and I can't handle it, And so I just think being able to change that mindset from a fear-based decision to an opportunity-based decision really changes the way you think about what is possible for you.
I really like that term, opportunity-based decisions.
Yeah, there's a lot out there, right there.
That has a lot of power. I think that really by shifting that mindset, we could probably do a lot more than we think we can do. I don't see how trust can be correlated to fear. How do these two concepts interrelate?
But they seem like they're sort of antithesis, right? Like, how can you have fear and trust working together? What's interesting about fear is that fear is internal, right? So anything, it's a feeling. And so when you are experiencing fear, it's either based on an experience that you've had before that taught you that whatever's happening is scary to you, or it's an assumption made based on information you've gotten from someone else about how scared you should be. There's two pieces to trust. And if you follow Brene Brown, who's incredible, if you don't, definitely go check her out. She's got some incredible groundbreaking work on trust.
And I'd love to interview her any day. Any day she wants to be interviewed, I'm there.
Brene, if you hear this broadcast, I'm just saying. But her research has been incredible in terms of sort of shifting the mindset about trust, because trust used to be sort of a one-faceted thing. There was no dimension to it, right? You either trust someone or you don't. It's black or white. What Brene found is that there's actually all these elements of trust. And so she calls it braving trust. So if you haven't read her books yet, definitely go out and do that. But she has this concept called braving trust, and each one of the letters of braving stands for an element of trust. I'm not going to get into the details of that right now because we could be here for 45 minutes talking just about this. But the way that trust interacts with fear is really the part that is self-trust. So we talk about trust and these elements of trust, but what doesn't happen, and a lot of times the conversation that we miss out on, is whether or not we actually trust ourselves. And so let's just say, for instance, one of braving the I is integrity, right? And integrity for Brene Brown is choosing courage over comfort. And that really sits with me, like, wow, integrity for a CPA or for an accountant generally is like, I'm truthful, I'm honest, I'm transparent, blah, 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 blah. But really courage over comfort. Do you choose the easy road because it's the road of least resistance? Or are you really taking a risk and going out and saying, wow, this is so uncomfortable for me, but this is the right thing to do, right? So it takes courage to do it, even though it's not comfortable. So I love that. So in this self-trust situation, in terms of internally, have I, in my decision-making, in my life choices, in my career planning, have I chosen courage over comfort? And for me personally, up until not very long ago, the answer was no. And so I could tell that my self-trust was low when I really started thinking about it. I didn't trust myself to make the right decision. And so I started making decisions out of fear. And that is where those two interrelate, is being able to say, wow, okay, I have this fear thing going on, but really underneath that all, it means I don't trust myself. If I'm making decisions based on fear, it means that the potential of me and what I can do in this world, I don't trust myself. I don't trust that I can do it. So I'm going to let fear lead me. And I really feel passionately about the potential that we create for ourselves when we take a step back and say, wow, you know what? I do trust myself. I mean, I might fail, but I can get back up again. I am a total badass. I can do this, right? And there's so many books out there and there's so many researchers that are doing sort of these studies on self-development, self-awareness, development in terms of your professional career. And I think all those are interrelated and come back to say, yeah, know what fear is, identify it, own it, wave to it and say, thanks for your concern. I appreciate your need to protect me. And then look at your self-trust and say, but you know what? I am worth it. I can do this. So fear's great, but it's not going to rule me. And I think to have those two pieces and then to look at it professionally, right? Because I can say all this and be really passionate about it. And there's going to be some CPAs and accountants that are like, whoa, way too touchy-feely. I have no idea what you're talking about right now, but it's not compliance related, so I don't want to talk about it. And I get that. But you can't be your best professional self if you're not your best self. And I really honestly believe that that's what holds us back professionally, is that honestly, internally, we don't trust ourselves to be bold and be brave and be innovative. And when we do, big things happen.
So there's a book that I read that I really enjoyed called You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. And she tells you to feed fear a suck-it sandwich. And I remind myself of that regularly when I feel afraid of doing something new. And I know, Lindsay, you've really taken a leap of faith and trusted yourself to start your own business, which is really exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing now?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting to me because it's still a side gig because I'm still really enjoying what I'm doing in the accounting space. I love the people that I'm working with and I feel like I'm making a difference there. But it's been really fun to explore this other side, which is my consulting practice. And it's really focused on purpose, right? So my goal in the consulting world is to say, hey, CPA firms, hey, other organizations, what are you really about? What is your real purpose? And does your culture reflect that? Could I walk in and talk to any one of your staff people and they would tell me exactly the same thing as to why you exist? And if the answer is no, you're probably not operating at your full potential, right? And it comes right back to fear and self-trust, but it's at the organizational level, which is a little more difficult, right, to kind of pick through. But really, as an organization, if you're afraid to change your business model because you've been doing it the same way for 25 years and you've had great profit returns and everything's running smoothly, that's great, but the world is changing. And if you're not ready to change with it, you're afraid, right? You're afraid. And you don't trust yourself and your people to take the right risks. So there's a whole bunch of work to be done in there. And that's really what my firm is sort of focused on, right? It's helping these organizations say, okay, where is our self-trust lacking? Where are we saying, gosh, like, we don't think we can do this? And how do we bolster that so we can get past this fear stuff and make us the organization that we really, truly have the potential to be? And they already have the potential, right? Like, I'm not adding any new things that they don't already have. It's coming from internal, but it's just recognizing it and going through that dirty work of being like, wow, let's just acknowledge that we don't trust ourselves. And then let's build that trust so that we can be great. And it's really fun. So it's in its baby stages. I'm still developing. I'm still trying to figure out, how the hell do you price that? is a challenge, but it's been a really, really great blessing because I've known so many people, between you and some other people at the AICPA that have been extremely, extremely encouraging and supportive. It's just been a fun journey. So it's at the beginning, but it's really fun. And yeah, it is really scary because I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm learning as I go, and it's been a really great process to go through.
But I would imagine if you take a step back and you think about, well, what is my purpose? Am I aligning to my purpose? That probably removes a little bit of that fear.
Oh, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think it comes back to, again, that self-trust and that fear sort of working together. But yeah, when I take a step back and just say, do I trust myself to be bold and to be innovative and to take a risk? But, I'm not risking my livelihood or my life, or limb, there's no fight or flight type thing going on there. It makes it so much easier, right? Like, you just get into the moment and you say, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this because it's what I love. And shockingly, what I love is valuable to others. So it's been fun to see that happen.
So we talked about feeding fear a suck it sandwich. And it makes it sound like self-trust is easy. But is it really easy? Obviously, we're talking about it. So, and, you've explored it. I know I've explored it both in my personal and professional life. And I find it's something I have to check in on and remind myself. Do you find self-trust easy, or has it become easier for you through this journey?
I wouldn't say it's definitely not easy. And especially when you start out the first time, you say, am I really afraid, or am I really not trusting myself? And then you're like, nope, definitely I totally trust myself. That's just a bad decision. Right? That's the easy way. So it's definitely hard. I think over time, it's not necessarily that it becomes easier. I just think it's developing a habit of asking yourself, where am I coming from when I'm making this decision? And is this, in line with what I really believe about myself? And when you start doing that, it's not necessarily that it's easier. It just becomes part of your process. And so you're just willing to have that conversation with you, because there have definitely been times where, I made a decision and then I looked back, even in the last 12 months, and I was like, I tried to convince myself that was like the right decision. And really, now that I'm looking back at all the factors, it really was just a fearful decision. I tried to talk myself out of it. No. That's not because of lack of self-trust. That's definitely because it's the right thing to do. So I still struggle with it for sure. But I'm willing to have the conversation with myself, right? And really be honest about it and transparent. So it makes it just part of the process.
So when you're working with clients, whether as a consultant or in your role as an accountant, how do you deal with issues of fear, with either business partners or consulting clients, and how do you reassure them?
Yeah. So here's the trick, right? Fear is not an external force. It's an internal force. So for me to be able to impact how someone feels is a lot more difficult than just saying, here, do these 3 things and then things will be fine. So usually it's a painful process. I mean, I want to be perfectly honest. There's a lot of me spending time asking really intrusive questions and then calling you out if I don't think that you're answering honestly. And then once you finally start being honest about it, and I'm not saying people are lying, like that's not what I mean. Nobody's coming out and they're like, nope, everything's great. But it's a defense mechanism, right? Like, oh, that doesn't really bother me. But I find that once we really started to get to the conversation, like you mentioned, maybe some fear related to partners, right, and uncertainty in there, usually what that comes back to is some kind of internal fear, some sort of story that you've told yourself about how things are going to play out that isn't true yet, right? It hasn't happened yet, but you've created a storyline, and being able to acknowledge that and honestly say, yeah, you know what, I'm assuming based on whatever inputs that this is the end result, and so now I'm freaking out. Being able to be honest about that, and then having a conversation with the partner that you may have had some concerns about, and saying, this is how I'm feeling, and these are the reasons I'm feeling this way. What can we do together? Then you start to have actual implementable strategies and action items that create a change in that dynamic, so the fear eventually alleviates itself. But I mean, it comes down like that self-trust thing. You got to be real honest with yourself to move forward.
And I think self-trust is going to become more important. We're dealing with a lot of change, whether you're an accountant or not an accountant. Our work lives are changing pretty rapidly right now, and there's a lot of disruption. And so learning to trust ourselves and maybe embrace fear and the power of fear is really important for the future.
Yeah. I have a colleague, Sarah Elliott at Intend to Lead, and she says, I look at fear and I say, hey, fear, I see you there. I know you're trying to keep me safe, and I appreciate you for doing that. But I'm going to go ahead and move forward with this because I know that I can trust myself when I'm doing the right thing. And I try and visualize that anytime I'm struggling through something, because for me, being able to kind of give fear a face and being able to say, hey, fear, man, I'm so lucky to have you. You keep me alive, right? You make sure I don't throw the boiling hot water in my face. Like there's things that you do to keep me safe, and man, do I appreciate that. But this time I trust myself, and I appreciate you, but I'm going to move forward. And I think for me, being able to sort of say, like, it's not ignoring fear, it's not shoving it back down, it's not being stronger than fear, that doesn't, to me, resonate. What resonates for me is being able to say, yeah, I mean, fear is a part of me. Like, that's okay. Like, it needs to be. And I don't know if you've seen Inside Out, but it's sort of the same premise, right? Of accepting, like, all of your feelings have importance, and pretending to be happy all the time is no way to get through life, because all of those feelings are important. So I think fear plays a really important role, and we need to acknowledge it, but it doesn't need to control us.
Right. And I also think, you read a lot about how pushing yourself and trying new things is so important to your growth. And sometimes you do need to overcome that fear to really grow.
Yeah. Especially think about in our profession, just the pressure to be right all the time. So it is astronomically difficult to convince accountants that touchy-feely self-awareness, development, and exploration is beneficial in some way, because we are so pre-programmed not to acknowledge that we may need to be better in some way. And so I think it's so much more meaningful when we have a whole professional group of people who are kind of saying, gosh, maybe we need to do something more. Maybe there is something out there. And I think, you've done a lot of work with the World Economic Forum, soft skill, success skill, whatever they're calling them now, sort of development things. And I think the profession is really looking at that and saying, yeah, we agree. You know what? These are things that you can't teach out of a book. They are experiential. They are meaningful, and they help us be better professionals because it's underlying values and skill sets that we really haven't focused on. And I think fear and self-trust and this personal development, self-awareness all fits into that as well.
I like to call them human skills. And the World Economic Forum, in their most recent Future of Jobs report that came out in the fall, it actually states that these skills are increasing in value. So that should appeal to accountants, right? These skills are becoming more valuable. I don't know if I can put a number to that. I think it's probably not as quantifiable, but I believe they are very important and powerful skills.
Well, yeah, look at where we're at. You guys talk about in your Go Beyond Disruption series, right? Where bots are playing a role, AI is playing a role. You have all these sort of computer generated intelligences that are going to be able to do a lot of the compliance related work that we have historically been responsible for. So yeah, like obviously the human skills are going to become where we have value, because we are not computers and AI, right? So, and they will not be able, those entities will not be able to develop the human skills, theoretically. I mean, maybe at some point in the future, but for now, that's what gives us value. So I think they're definitely onto something.
We'll let our kids worry about that stage of AI, and we'll stick with our human skills for now. Well, Lindsay, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you, as it always is. And I know you're going to be speaking at AICPA Engage in June for the EDGE conference on this very topic. So if people want to hear more and connect with you and network with you at Engage, I would encourage them to take a look at that website, which is AICPAengage.com. And I look forward to more conversations with you, Lindsay, and I'm definitely going to think about feeding fear a suck-it sandwich and trusting myself.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure, and I am definitely looking forward to Engage. It's going to be an incredible week.
Lindsay, before we let you go, is there one piece of advice that you have for our audience about how to tackle fear?
Yeah, I would just say that there is no way to tackle fear. I think instead you should invite it in, have a cup of tea, tell it thank you for its concern, and then move on.
Great advice. Do you name fear, or do you call it fear?
I just call it fear. What up, fear? How you doing today?
So, Lindsay, if people want to connect with you, where would they find you?
There's a few places. So I'm on Twitter at Stevenson CPA. You can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Lindsay Stevenson CPA. You can find my consulting practice on LinkedIn, Origin Evolution LLC in LinkedIn. And then anytime you want to email me, it's lindsay@originevolution.com.
And I'll add to that you can also find Lindsay in several of our human intelligence videos. We'll add a link to that in our show notes. I'm Jennifer Gardner for the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, signing off from Durham, North Carolina, and I look forward to speaking to you in future episodes.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of Go Beyond Disruption, highlighting trailblazing women in the tech sphere.
This podcast is brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants.
For more information about today's topic, search for us online using keywords Go Beyond Disruption.
Feel free to share your thoughts with us on social media using the hashtags
Human Intelligence, Go Beyond Disruption, or AICPA Women Lead.
This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material. On such material. On such material. On such material.